Thank you for that lovely introduction. On a personal note, thank you for all of your well wishes and especially for your patience as I've been prioritizing recovering what I can of my voice. It has been so hard not to be able to tell you how happy I am to see you, how happy I am that you're doing well, or to not be able to congratulate you on the awesome things that have been happening in your lives and in your careers. Now that I actually can, let me just say, it is so good to be back at the Northeast Regional Folk Alliance. I still remember my first NERFA in either 2011 or 2012. I had just moved to the DC area from Boone, North Carolina. I Googled open mics near me and serendipitously found myself at the folk club of Reston Herndon. I was, on many a Tuesday night, the youngest person there, and on more often than not, the only Black person there. Yet, I always felt welcome. There were several songwriters like myself who attended and wanted to share their original songs, but most folks wanted to sing songs that meant something to them and that they could sing with others. There was something so familiar about one instrument and many voices. It reminded me of being back in my hometown, back at Harrison Chapel AME Church. So week after week, I went. I got introduced to Miriam Makiba's music and Elizabeth Cotton's music there. Eventually, I was also introduced to members of the Songwriters Association of Washington who frequented the folk club, and they introduced me to NERFA. They tried to warn me about the late nights and utter chaos of guerrilla showcases. They tried to prepare me for all of it, but you know, there is no preparing you for your first NERFA. Your first NERFA is really just a dress rehearsal for your second one. Even with all of the chaos, I still gained a lot from that very first one. I remember hearing and meeting so many incredibly talented artists for the first time, many of whom I am now fortunate enough to call friend. I remember my first On the Griddle and how a seemingly disappointing moment ultimately led to one of the most important relationships in my professional life. As a blossoming independent singer-songwriter with no real idea how to do this thing I was feeling called to do, this community definitely helped inform my understanding of what it would take to ultimately answer that call. It would take me a few years to realize that the call I was actually answering was to be a folk singer. Now, it has taken me a very long time to decide what to say to you, but I think that trying to live up to and fully understand what those two words mean is the heart of what I want to talk to you about. When I was growing up in Richlands, North Carolina, I didn't really hear the term folk music being tossed around. Most of you have heard me talk about my mom, who I affectionately refer to as the Rev. She was ordained to preach by the AME Church, so most of what was playing at my house was Shirley Caesar and Mahalia Jackson, Aretha Franklin, Sam Cooke, and a little Otis Redding here and there. At least, of course, until I was old enough to buy my own CDs, after which there was a lot of Tracy Chapman and Melissa Etheridge. How my mother convinced herself I didn't know what I was saying when I wrote, "I think I might be gay" in my diary when I was a kid is a TED Talk waiting to happen. I can't tell you how many times I've been asked about the folk singers who inspired me in my journey into folk music. No, I definitely did not grow up listening to Pete Seeger or Woody Guthrie or Bob Dylan. In fact, I'm pretty sure that I only ever went to 2 folk concerts during the entirety of my first 30 years on this planet. One was Sweet Honey in the Rock, and the other was Ani DeFranco. And no, I definitely didn't grow up learning to play guitar alongside the Beatles anthology. The only reason I even learned guitar was so that I could teach my college girlfriend how to play, which is also why I play upside down and backwards. Now, this was back when the show Friends was really big and everybody wanted to be Phoebe. I took one look at the guitar my girlfriend had bought for herself and thought, it can't be hard, it only has 6 strings. It's like, tell me you're a classically trained clarinetist in Aries without telling me you're a classically trained clarinetist in Aries. Not your typical folk singer origin story, huh? Thankfully, life has a way of getting you where you're supposed to be, even if it takes a couple of detours and U-turns along the way. There is no other genre in which I could imagine having grown up as a singer-songwriter. And I think that's because I absolutely grew up listening to folk music. I just didn't know it at the time. That's one of the many disservices gatekeepers do to a genre as fluid as ours. And it's why it matters who is keeping and tending to those gates. After all, folk music at its most basic is music of the people. And at its most profound, folk music is music of all of the people. As you might expect from a PK, that's a preacher's kid, I sometimes like to think about genres of music in terms of church denominations. Country music, obviously Southern Baptist. Meanwhile, Americana is more like the Episcopalians trying to reconcile their faith with the inescapable truth that LGBTQ people exist. The folk community is, without question, basically like the Unitarians of the genres. Because even before institutions like Folk Alliance International or its regional iterations existed, that same deep commitment to justice seemed to go hand in hand with this genre. Joan Baez. After members of the Ku Klux Klan bombed the 16th Street Baptist Church on September 15, 1963, a hate crime and an act of domestic terrorism that left 22 people injured and killed 4 young Black girls, Addie Mae Collins, Carol Robertson, and Cynthia Wesley, all of whom were only 14, along with Denise McNair, who was only 11. Joan Baez released Birmingham Sunday in early 1964. Although it was written by her brother-in-law, Richard Farina, her hauntingly beautiful rendition was a wake-up call for many white Americans who had previously not allowed themselves to fully see and then be outraged by the racism ravaging much of America, but especially the South. Phil Ochs. Many of us know Miss Nina Simone's iconic condemnation of the state of Mississippi. But I think Phil Ochs' song, Here's to the State of Mississippi, is a textbook example of what the Black gay community would call reading someone for absolute filth. In one song, he takes the Magnolia State to task on everything from the indoctrination and grooming of its children with dreams of so-called white supremacy to the very nightmarish reality of those ideals. Odetta. With a voice equally as commanding as her stature, opera singer turned artist activist, Odetta grew up listening to everything from the Metropolitan Opera to the Grand Ole Opry. It wouldn't take her long to meld the many facets of her musical influences into the powerhouse performer she would ultimately become. But the impact she alone would have on this genre is still being felt today. The National Visionary Leadership Project released a video interview of Odetta speaking about her life as an activist, in which she was asked, "What role do you think folk music played in the civil rights movement?" After a lengthy pause, she said, "It was central. It was music from those who went before. The music gave them strength, and the music gave us strength to carry it on." If you've ever taken a social justice songwriting class with me, you've heard me reference Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, Why We Can't Wait. There's one passage in particular in which he's describing the significance of freedom songs, but I think it also applies to folk music, especially since for all intents and purposes, they are one and the same. He says, freedom songs are the soul of the movement. They are more than just incantations of clever phrases designed to invigorate a campaign. They are the sorrow songs, the shouts for joy, the battle hymns, and the anthems of our movement. I believe that contemporary folk music will not only be all of those things, but it will also be the medium through which history is passed and protected, just as it has always been. That is something Odetta and Sweet Honey in the Rock and so many others did so well. I don't know if this is the case for anyone else, but for me, one of the unintended consequences of the pandemic was a newfound appreciation for the safety of solitude. And so instead of flying, I drive a lot. One thing that has made all of that driving a little more tolerable is audiobooks. I was listening to Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower, in which one of the characters says, "Persistence isn't always safe, but it's often necessary." As someone who uses a lot of words, this felt like the most perfect distillation of what so many of us are singing and talking about these days. We are living in unprecedented times. There are wars raging on multiple continents. We are on the precipice of technology having way too much influence over us, and way too many of us don't have enough influence over our elected officials, which is why some of us are living with fewer rights than our parents and grandparents had. And on top of all of that, thanks to our collective unwillingness to address climate change, once-in-a-generation natural disasters are happening so frequently that they barely meet the threshold of news anymore. These are the times for folk music to do what it has done in some way or form at every such moment in recorded human history, especially in American history. Whether it's Sam Cooke and Bob Dylan singing "A Change Is Gonna Come" and "Blowing in the Wind" alongside the civil rights movement, or Holly Near singing her iconic "Singing for Our Lives" after Harvey Milk was assassinated, or the countless labor songs and freedom songs penned by Black Americans and transformed into so many of the folk songs we still sing today, folk music has done its job and has been an ever-present arbiter of hope and truth. There is so much work to do on so many fronts. There is so much to be said, and those of us with the audacity to call ourselves folk singers, those of us who have something to say must, as the great Phil Oakes said, say it now. And it's not just talking the talk, it's walking the walk. We've all seen the pictures and videos of Peter, Paul, and Mary and all of the other folk singers who were there that day in 1963 at the March on Washington. But how many of us know that Dave Von Ronk, the mayor of McDougal Street, the godfather of the Greenwich Village folk scene, was arrested during Stonewall? Like so many Black kids in the South, I grew up hearing my mom say, "You better know whose you are so you can know who you are." I am a folk singer. I come from a long line of changemakers who understood that when people hope for better, they fight for better. And not only that, I am in an ever-growing community circle of not just folk singers, but house concert presenters and venues, festival organizers, and DJs who understand that music doesn't have to change the world, but it sure does inspire the people who do. But music can only do that if we are fearless enough to let it. Persistence isn't always safe, but it's often necessary. When I was asked to be a keynote speaker, I immediately thought, this community is full of people who inspire me and inform the ways in which I don the title folk singer. What on earth could I possibly have to say to them? But like most good folk music, I don't need to tell you anything you don't already know. I just need to remind you of the truth you already carry. I'm sure some of you will ask yourselves, why should I even try when it has been said before? You should try because not every song is going to reach everybody. Margot Carruthers, who was the keynote speaker at this year's Lunenburg Folk Harbor Festival, said, "The only thing you can do to harm these songs is not sing them." There are white people struggling to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement. There are straight people struggling to talk about LGBTQ equity. There are lesbians struggling to advocate for trans women, and on and on and on. You should try because sometimes the messenger matters almost as much as the message. Many years ago, I had the great pleasure of meeting Beth Wood at the 30A Songwriters Festival. At the beginning of her set, she sang her mission statement. Later, during that same festival, I met my friend and sister in song, Kashana, for the first time, and she also had a mission statement. Both of these powerful women, their missions were crystal clear with every intention-filled, utterly profound word that they sang and spoke. But the laying out of exactly who they were and how they meant to walk through this world is something that has not left me in all the years since. It was like an ironclad accountability clause meant to hold them not to some subjective industry standard, but to a standard that was theirs and theirs alone. I thought about it many times, but never could seem to narrow down just what my mission statement would be if I had one. And then one day, as if it was the opening line to a song that I had been meaning to write my entire life, there it was. To amplify the voices of the unheard, to shed light on the unseen, and to be a steadfast reminder that hope and love are the truest pathways to equity and justice. Thank you. My voice is an instrument, but it is also a tool capable of tremendous power, and I will wield it with the care and precision that my profession demands because I am a folk singer. I wear that badge proudly. One of the greatest tricks of oppression is convincing the oppressed that they aren't powerful enough to create any lasting, meaningful change, even when we can point to countless instances in history where the oppressed have done just that. But the thing is, when you criminalize teaching history, when you start banning books, when you start making the quality of education directly proportionate to the quantity of someone's income, you make it difficult for people to learn about that history. Folk singers, and I mean all of us under that giant tent encompassing every subgenre from Americana to hip hop, folk singers are going to be the keepers and revelators of that history. And we have a deep, deep bench. Rhiannon Giddens, Linda Tillery, Melanie DeMore, Sweet Honey in the Rock, Ani DeFranco, Toshi Regan, Rising Appalachia, Holly Near, Tom Paxton, Judy Collins, Dar Williams, Susan Warner, John McCutcheon, Lucy Murphy, Mary Gaucher, The Neils, Janice Ian, Cheryl Wheeler, Allison Russell, Heather May, Ray Zaragoza, Kashana, Scott Cook, Carsey Blanton, Emma's Revolution, Greg Greenway, Reggie Harris, Joe Jinks, Deirdre McCullough, Ordinary Elephant, Peter Mulvey, Tret Fury, Sam Gleaves, Chris Pierce, Jake Blunt, Mia Byrne, Adeem the Artist, Jill Sobule, Flamey Grant, Tom Prasado Rao, Lily Lewis, Treya Lamb, Saul Paul, Tim Blest, Luke Wallace, Kathy Fink and Marcy Markser, Reverend Robert Jones, Antigone Rising, Humbird, The Wild Ponies, Grace Pettis, Lizzie No, Queen Esther, Melody Walker, Seth Glear, Jean Rowe, and I bet each of you could add 10 or 20 more names to that list, and that is the point. Odetta was everywhere during her time on this planet, in coffee houses, at festivals, at rallies, and on television shows, turning prison songs back into struggle songs. In one of her last interviews before her death, she said, "They were liberation songs. You're walking down life's road, society's foot is on your throat, every which way you turn, you can't get from under that foot, and you reach a fork in the road, and you can either lie down and die, or insist upon your own individual life. Those people who made up the songs were the ones who insisted on life and living. That was an incredible example to me." May each and every one of us strive to live up to that calling of insisting on life and living. May we never forget that love, joy, and hope are vital parts of any movement for change. May we always remember Phil Oakes' wise words that when I've got something to say, I'm gonna say it now. And may we never, ever, ever forget what it means to be a folk singer.